This month we have Dr. Warren Farrell as our guest. He's the author of The Liberated Man and his more recent book, Why Men Are the Way They Are. And Warren is considered to be one of the world experts in the relationships between men and women. For 20 years he's been studying that relationship, and I appreciate you taking the personal time to come and visit with us.
I'm really happy to do it.
That's great. Warren and I, by the way, have become friends, and I feel really appreciative to be able to call you a friend, and I feel very respectful that even though we're close friends, that every time I meet you, I learn something new from you, and I'm excited for our listeners to be able to learn some things from you as well here. But I want people to know that your book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, not only being a national bestseller, but it was incredibly provocative in that it really stirred people up. It was quite different than the perspective you've offered in Liberated Man, and one of the things that I respect about you is your continuous growth. As long as I've known you, you're always making new distinctions. You started out, I think, as a person who was basically presenting almost purely a woman's viewpoint of the man-woman relationship. With Why Men Are the Way They Are, it's kind of the man's perspective, and I think maybe part of your expertise has come because you've been at both ends and you really have an understanding of both those areas. I'm kind of gushy about you because you're my buddy, but I want people listening to know this is not just my view of you in terms of your expertise. After 20 years of working with men and women and writing this book, you've gotten incredible acclaim. On the cover of Warren's book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, quotes say things like, "The most important book ever written about love, sex, and intimacy." That's the New York Post. My good buddy Ken Blanchard said, "The best book I've read on male-female relationships, superb and brilliant." Dr. Carol Castle, author of Swept Away, says, "Witty, provocative, and probing. I guarantee this book will leave you with a different understanding of men and women. Simply terrific." And maybe one more example, "The most important book ever written for women. The most important book ever written for men." Dr. John Mooney, professor of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. You've stirred people up with this. And what we should start with is giving people a little bit of background on what were some of the personal reasons that made you want to study the relationship of men and women originally. And then let's talk a little bit about what some of your insights are. So what did start you?
I can remember my mother cycling in and out of depression, and I can remember her coming out of depression when she just took a simple clerical job, and she had other adults to communicate with, and she had some money so that she didn't have to go to my father like a welfare recipient asking my father for a dole so she could control her own life. And I can remember being touched by that and feeling like there's no reason in the world why a woman should have to be, in a sense, going to her husband and asking for permission when she's an adult human being.
Right.
And then I started to see that she was, how much a state of mind feeling powerful is. Here my mother was going to work, a relatively simple job, and feeling more powerful than she was when she felt imprisoned with kids at home, and she only had 2 children. And so I was really feeling like there's something missing here. And when the women's movement surfaced, and women's movement was saying, in essence, women can control their own life. They don't have to be at home only. That's fine if they want to be, but it's not an obligation. It suddenly made sense to me. And in the meantime, unfortunately, my mother had gone into a deep state of depression and had died. And I think probably on a very personal and emotional level, I started to hear this perhaps in a way that's a little bit deeper than other people had a chance to hear. But more importantly than that, or as importantly as that, I was able to hear it and do something about it because my former wife was becoming vice president of IBM. She was controlling her life. She had her own source of income. And as a result of that, she said to me, if you need to take some more time out from your doctoral work and the women's movement is that inspiring to you, spend some time and do it. A lot of my male friends, my colleagues, were needing to support a family. They were not able to have the luxury of taking time out to change their doctoral dissertation topic, to reframe it, to turn it back into a committee 3 or 4 times like I had to do, take that extra half year to do that. I had the luxury to be able to sit back and look at the larger picture in life. And I had that luxury as a result of a woman supporting herself rather than me supporting the woman.
So as a result, you got involved in NOW at that time, right? NOW being the National Organization for Women.
Yes, I got involved with the National Organization for Women, and then I found myself listening to a lot of what they were saying. The women's movement was very impressed that I was listening rather than lecturing to them. They asked me if I would start some men's groups within the framework of the National Organization for Women. I did that. As the men's groups became successful and were producing men that were also listening, they asked me if I would run for the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And then I served on their board for 3 years and began articulating the women's perspective. And that's when I began to see that by articulating the women's perspective, I was getting a great deal of positive feedback from women.
Standing ovations.
Standing ovations constantly from women. But I also began to notice after a while that as I went back 4 or 5 years later to speak to the same groups again, that oftentimes I would notice that the women and men were broken up from each other.
The ones who'd listen to you.
The ones, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't presume to have had so much impact that I was the only cause in their breaking up.
I'm teasing.
Yes,
I'm
right.
teasing.
But nevertheless, I was saying to myself, I'm wondering here if I'm missing something. If maybe if I listened more carefully to the men would be showing up in larger numbers. I mean, I fooled myself into believing at the outset that the reason that there were 95% women in my audiences was because I was the only sensitive man in America, and all the rest of the men were Neanderthals.
Right.
And when I got over that self-serving attitude, I had one of those rare moments of internal security. Where I finally allowed myself to say, well, maybe one of the reasons that men aren't showing up in such large numbers is because you aren't articulating something that rings true for men.
Right.
And so I started listening more carefully to my tapes of the men's groups I had started and began to see that, in fact, men were saying things that I was barely hearing. And as I began to hear those and articulate those things to women, I began to see that my standing ovations were dropping off from women.
At least at now.
Yes, at least at the outset.
Right.
But many women were coming up to me a few weeks later and saying, I took your perspective home and I tried it on my husband or I tried it on my boyfriend, and he was saying, oh, that's exactly the way I feel. Let me come to one of those meetings myself.
That's fabulous.
And so that was what started making me realize that if I was really going to help improve love between the sexes, I had to hear both sexes and get both sexes to understand what the other sex was not able to articulate for them.
I think the great value that I personally found in the book is it helped me to have a greater understanding of what men and women really need. For years, my own study has been everything that we need comes down to our survival, and then we move up to higher levels of needs, of values, security, self-esteem, etc. But what you did is how people go about meeting those needs. How do you go about meeting the need of surviving, meeting the need of self-esteem, meeting the need of feeling like you're in control of your life is quite different based on cultural conditioning. And so it's not so much that we have different needs at the end, we have the same needs, but there may be different means to get those needs that we've learned culturally. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is the difference in your research between what a man needs and what a woman needs, and maybe also touch on what a man communicates he needs and what a woman communicates they need, because many times people don't say what they really need.
Yes. Both sexes have to learn how to survive. We taught women and men very different ways of getting those survival needs met. We basically taught women throughout history to do some version of finding a man to protect her and to protect the children that she would produce. We taught men, in order to get survival needs met, you learn how to produce them for yourself, but once you've learned how to produce them for yourself, you are going to be deprived of some things, namely love and sex, until you provide not only for your survival needs, but women's as well.
And your children's.
Yes. And so what basically men started learning was very good survival skills. What women started learning was very good skills in finding men, especially the men who were the best survivors. And the men who were the best survivors were also the best protectors and usually the best killers. And so women started learning, find a man who is the prince, find a man who is a hero. The very word hero comes from the Greek word meaning slave, protect, and servant. The hero was the servant of the society, the servant of the woman, the slave to the woman and the society, who was willing to risk his life to kill the dragon for her and the children and the community.